All right. Well, hello to everybody joining us today. This is our weekly digital strategy chat brought to you by Denverdata Web. So we are a digital strategy company. So we help our clients achieve their unique objectives and challenges utilizing a goals-focused approach to web development, web design, digital marketing. Pretty much whatever your digital challenge is, we can help you with that. And my name is David Csonka. I'm a digital strategist with Denverdata Web. Today, in a very special session here, we have Tom. Tom is the president of Denverdata Web. Tom, what have you been involved with over the years at Denverdata? It's a lot of different things, right?
I absolutely worn just about every hat. Yeah, we started about 22 years ago, and I've done everything from software development to the full breadth of digital marketing.
Awesome. So today we're going to cover actually a pretty interesting topic. I'm pretty excited about this one specifically because we're covering software development project strategy, right? So a lot of different areas. We're going to go into things like what it actually looks like to get success from your development project, the realities of budgeting, those sorts of things, setting expectations for stakeholders. I really dig it because most of my career, such as it is so far, has actually been involved with web development. So that's where I really got my start. Um, Even before I finished school, I got a gig working for the university I was at to develop an online web form that supported like a broad strategic initiative for the organization. Now, it sounds pretty fancy. It wasn't actually as complex as I'd like to think it was. But for me, it was a big deal because, I got hired by university and it showed me that, I could do this. Now, I got a job with the university after I graduated, but it was basically doing IT support. But that's how it goes, right? You work your way up. Um, Tom, you've probably had a much more extensive and glamorous career in web development, software development than I have. But take us back through what that's been like for you. What you've been doing in development so far this time.
We started at the time in the late 90s, started in, an even mix between web development, which was just kind of starting to emerge or become mainstream, and then traditional desktop development, which had been the standard up until that point. So I was very involved in desktop development on Windows platforms and also on Unix platforms. And then as we evolved over the years, gradually every platform, every time we'd ask the question, well, does it need to be a distributed application? It was always yes, it needs to be internet. And there was a clear point where the future, at least of the software that we were building, was more than likely an internet application. So we have focused on that for close to the last 18 years. And it's been an interesting ride. I entered it thinking that web was the easier version of software development, and it comes out it's actually much more nuanced, has many different layers to it. The most unusual or difficult for a technical mind to understand is marketing.
Well, that sounds like blasphemy though, because talking to software development, grognards, these old guys, the old guard, those folks, oh, you're just doing web development. I mean, that's child's play. You're just going to fiddle around with PHP, right, and call it a day. I mean, but that's not the case. You think it's tougher, actually?
No, it absolutely is. It absolutely is for a variety of reasons, but the biggest being that it is it tends to be the internet tends to be at least have some focus on, or it tends to be some facet of your marketing message. In most cases, the central part of your marketing. And so that's, with web applications, there certainly are, with traditional applications, desktop, there certainly are considerations about branding and usability, but not at all at the level that you would see them on the web, because the web has not only the technical complexities, but also the communication challenges, often many distributed and integrated systems. So it just tends to be bigger problems, bigger solutions, and more far-reaching.
I imagine it's probably fair to say that nowadays, similar to how with marketing, all marketing is digital marketing. It's the thing that gets said a lot because it's just that's where we are in the world. I mean, certainly there are, and people still put up billboards and stuff, but that's all stuff's probably still connected to the internet anyway. I mean, it's all digital. It's all it's not just paper on the wall anymore. But software that just runs on your computer, I mean, I guess there's still a place for that, but it seems to me the vast majority of development going on, developing products and solutions, it's just web development now, right?
Yeah, there's a pretty limited world anymore where there's a compelling argument to have something that's desktop, because you have to do there's ongoing maintenance and installation, versioning, challenges that more or less are not there with a web type application. So it's usually cases where there is no other way to do it. High security, VPN applications, native apps that absolutely rely on specific hardware. All your Macintosh apps, for
Right.
example.
The native iOS apps, this ongoing thing, but that's a topic for a different day, I'm sure. I think with web development, it's always been fascinating to me, the idea of like creating something new. Somebody out there is going to use it, right? Somebody out there is going to mess with that. It's going to open their mind and able to do things they couldn't do before. The explosion of the SaaS, the software as a service market over the years has been pretty remarkable. I think there's something like in the marketing space, the amount of software, web development kind of SaaS solutions out there, it like doubles, every month or something like that. I mean, it's probably not quite that crazy, but it's huge, right? I mean, I was looking at a graphic and it's just this exponential growth because everybody's thinking, hey, I got a better way to solve this problem, a better mousetrap to build. Seems to me there's a lot of big rewards to be able to develop a product in a way that's going to help somebody solve their problems. But I mean, probably a lot of big risks too, maybe even for everybody involved. I mean, how has that been over the years in that kind of space? You're still doing it. So it seems like it's rewarding and, maybe not just monetarily, but emotional ways too. You're
Yeah.
still sticking in it. I mean, what does it feel like to have been in web development for so long?
It certainly is gratifying when to see the excitement, from a customer when we launch a new application or their vision, and and start to see it succeed. But software is, and especially web development, is challenging in that there are many ideas that don't ever either don't succeed or sometimes don't even make it to see the light of day.
Mm.
And that's probably the least gratifying part of my job. But comes with the territory. Software development inherently hinges on assumptions. It's a fairly new thing in terms of human disciplines. So it's evolving, and it can be real challenging. That said, it is very fun. I sleep well at night. I love solving problems for the customers, and our push, more recent times has been to align with people that really do have that potential for success, so that we're working on projects that see the light of day, that where the customer really is excited to see it get out there, has the right mindset, takes the right advice, partners with us to get it there, and then we get a really exciting launch. So there's almost nothing better than that.
Well, success is a pretty kind of loaded term because, I mean, everybody wants success, but there's a lot of wreckage along the road on this path of advancement and the web space and web development. But you wrote an article recently, and it really struck me as a really interesting concept. Of what it actually takes to have a successful software or web development project. And the way you put it, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. But it struck me as it's not really what I would think of typically. And I want to you usually in these projects, you don't really stop spending money if it's successful.
Right.
This idea that it's like, all right, we make it and we're good, and then moving on, right? No, that's not really the case. I mean, what does a successful project really look like then?
A successful project really in any paradigm, but certainly in the context of the web, is a project that one sees the light of day, which is a big achievement, that connects or aligns with some user community, and begins to pick up some adoption. Once it's getting adoption, there's a generally a channel of feedback that comes from those people that are adopting. And if it's getting adoption, they're also often making money or at least establishing data, the trends necessary to get funding in cases with ventures. But ultimately, yeah, a successful software project is one that never stops spending. And you think of my article centered on words. I'm sorry, on Windows 3.1, which has come a long way since. and really kind of showing that as an example of even Microsoft didn't really know this idea was going to succeed. They thought Windows was a good idea. They had every confidence that it was, but they started relatively small and got it out there. It did get adopted. It did take off. It has become a major platform, and as we know, Bill Gates is among the richest people in the world right now.
He's doing all right. He'll survive, right?
Yeah, right. He's doing just fine. So yeah, that's really how I would. That's what a successful software product on the web looks like.
Well, the idea of Windows and thinking back, because I used Windows 3.1. I mean, that was early on in my career of involvement with computers and things like that. I admit, but FreeCell, I think, is widely regarded as one of the greatest sources of wasted time in the history of humankind. Really, Microsoft FreeCell, that solitaire game, and Windows 3.1, that was a huge step forward for the human species and recreation. And I spent many fond hours, days, weeks doing that. But I was looking at some of the figures that you quote in your article, and it's mind blowing to me. Overall, their investment in that product system over the course of something like 10 years and beyond, you're getting upwards of like billions of dollars, right? But like their initial investment was just a fraction of that, like maybe like 1%.
Right.
And so this idea that if they got Windows 3.0, like, it was great, revolutionized everything, it really made Apple mad. What are they doing? What is watching the movie with was it Pirates of Silicon Valley or something like that, right? If they just stopped there, I mean, where would we be today? It's really interesting to think, because they didn't stop. They didn't just like stop throwing money at it, because they had lightning in a bottle, and like, all right, let's make more of this. Let's figure out how we can make this even better. And they just keep throwing money at it, keep making money. I mean, it seems to me that kind of the root of what you're getting at here is that they didn't just stop, and that's how they kept being even more successful, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. They were more successful because they started small and because they didn't stop. And if they had failed to do either of those, they wouldn't have succeeded in the same way.
You use the term in your article, the cycle of ROI, right? ROI being return on investment. So you also mentioned a moment ago about feedback from the users and kind of iterate on that. So is that kind of a piece of that, on how to make that, just because you throw money at it doesn't mean it's going to be successful, though, right? I mean, that's a piece of the long-term success, I imagine, but there's more to that.
Yeah, absolutely. There is the strategic component certainly shouldn't be downplayed. Yeah, you can't just throw money at it. It really is a very, to make success out of a software product, you do also have to utilize a process that lends itself to your success. And the one that the process that we use, or the kind of general philosophy that we use with regard to managing software projects is Agile, which is a fairly prevalent methodology, if you will, currently for managing software development projects. And it's based, among many other things, based on the principle of baby steps, taking small cycles, avoiding making large presumptions about what your user community is going to think or do with the software. And the other component of that, or a term we use very often that relates to that, is the concept of the MVP, the minimum viable product. And that is really, by definition, the smallest possible unit of a software concept that can begin to generate, essential information, in most cases that being, user feedback or some revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that you don't set your sights on the far future. You set your sights on the immediate future. Build something, test the waters, let it reap some revenue. If that does happen, now you have an argument and funding to take the next step. And if it doesn't, you're not out a vast amount of money.
It sounds rather scientific to me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it certainly is. There are a lot of scientific principles. Certainly measurement is very central to it. When we're taking those small steps, it is very regimented in the amount of time that we take to do the to do components of that. Even a single MVP will be released typically in what we call iterations. I'm sorry, in sprints, which tend to be about 2-week iterations of time.
Mhm.
That our entire team will cycle through a list of fixed scope tasks that come together over a series of sprints to be the MVP or a release.
It sounds very different from, some of the project management approaches I've been familiar with in the past. So like waterfall is one type of project management methodology. And, and generally I probably butcher the analogy, but the idea is, you collect all the information and, each, what the requirements are, the specifications down to a lot of detail. And everything can just like fall over and just keep being completed sequentially. I'm quite sure that's not what it's meant by waterfall, but that's the one I'm kind of most familiar with. And it just seems very different from that, because the idea is, we spend a lot of time in that type of approach, understanding every aspect of what the thing needs to do, ask mountains of questions, document it all out. And then we look at each piece like, all right, here's the estimate for this, and that. It's an enormous amount of time invested up front. But I have to admit, in a lot of cases, what happens later on, it's, I don't want to say tragic, but it can be kind of frustrating where like, well, it turns out this idea we had about how this should operate, it's not panning out. And we'd like to change that. Or, now that we've learned a little bit, do we want to do something different? Well, I mean, we didn't estimate doing something different. We estimate doing this. I mean,
Right.
we got to navigate that now. So it sounds like Agile is just really different from that.
When it really comes down to it, I think it is most distinct because of the discipline and the enforced smaller cycles. That ultimately, in the scenario you just described with Waterfall, that product, at the point where they have to do a second release, that they are doing iterative development. They just spent a lot of money to build that first release that may or may not really hit the mark. And in your example, it did not hit the mark. And so that was really a good example. What we saw, ultimately, even though one of the biggest distinctions is the lengths of the size of the release that you're putting together. Waterfall development had there were ultimately, because of that and other pieces that were absent at the time in the way people thought about software development. Waterfall often exceeded the established, it tried to take a very fixed cost approach. They tried to collect endless amounts of requirements up front, which was a huge, a vast amount of effort, even to review, and often wasn't honored or even and looked at by the development team because it was just such a vast, often, spec documents.
Who wants to look at all that?
Right. It was a nightmare, right? People didn't want to write it. They didn't want to read it. They didn't read it. And when it was all said and done, they had a product that was delivered late, was way over budget, and was off the mark. Once the users got in there were major sections that got scrapped and redone. And it was like steering the Titanic. It was very, very slow moving projects.
From what I recall, the Titanic deck worked out okay. I mean,
No.
I mean, it made millions of dollars in the theaters. It couldn't have been that bad, right?
Titanic is a pretty good analogy for many, many software projects. I'd say in terms of the ratio of success, and hopefully this isn't a reflection on my inability to do quality work. I think that with traditional waterfall, probably 50% of projects didn't succeed, and probably a quarter of them never saw the light of day, which is an agonizing feeling for a software developer. With Agile, it's not amazing, but it's much bigger numbers. Success is always, there are a lot of factors in success that are outside of our control as software developers, but we can certainly help. But in Agile, significantly more see the light of day, and significantly more are successful.
I mean, that's great. I mean, I know for me specifically, like me personally, like the idea, like it's, I know I said like a minute ago or something, like the idea that somebody out there is going to get to use this thing I built, even if it's not my idea, I had a hand in it, knowing that, wow, that's great. I imagine, maybe people who help on the assembly line putting together cars, and like, somebody's going to drive this around, this is going to help them go see amazing things, do amazing things, and I had a part in that. I feel good about that. I kind of feel some of that too with development, right? And not
Absolutely.
having it actually get out there. I know, losing out on a lot of money and capital investment hurts, but I mean, it not even being out there, I feel it just is the worst.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the pain of seeing your creative investment being discarded is pretty hurtful. And it's just part of the deal, but yeah, it is among the most punishing parts of the job. But,
Well, I mean, it's
so I apologize.
no, yeah.
To further exemplify, I've been on projects where the project had been cut, but there was remaining budget, and we continued to work on a project that we knew already was never going to see the light of day,
Oh, wow.
and that's especially frustrating. Getting paid, it helps, but it doesn't make an experience like that pleasant.
I mean, it's like, those guys in like World War or something, like there's been an armistice. Hey, everybody's celebrating peace, but there's guys still in the front line. Like, what are we doing here? I mean, I'm all here for king and country, but I mean, what's the point? Yeah, that hurts. But you said something that really struck me here was, you know, waterfall is, in that kind of approach, it's figured out ahead of time. It's very fixed. People like fixed, fixed cost, fixed scope, fixed everything because like this is what I'm going to get, right? I mean, we know from experience, like, well, that's not actually how it works a lot of times. But it seems like people like that. Maybe it's like a little blanket. It keeps them warm at night. But then, somewhere in the middle of the night, somebody's stealing the covers and you're cold anyway. It just doesn't work out. But agile is not really a fixed thing, right? I mean, it changes, it morphs, there's iterations, and this somehow actually produces better results.
Yeah, I mean, I will start by saying fixed is not the traditional waterfall. Fixed never came out to be fixed anyway. Those projects were pitched as a fixed cost project, but had overrun contingency clauses that ultimately added up to way more money being paid out on work for projects than was really purported, which was or was projected, and that is one of the bigger challenges right there. But and I'm sorry, can you ask the question again, David?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't know if I have a question, but it seems to me that it's remarkable, the idea that not fixing all these requirements, not fixing the costs and scope, and taking
Yes,
things in chunks, that you can get better results from Agile, and I guess maybe happier people, which maybe is an even more important metric, right? That
yeah,
just, it seems far fetched, but the way you put it, it makes sense.
yeah, it's counterintuitive, and once you see it in action, it starts to make sense, and it's very clear. But it is always a tough sell on new customers because that's exactly what they say is, gosh, that's you mean I could spend any amount of money on this, and the answer is often yes. But it is also a discipline that's intended to. It's not intended to give you vast predictability. It's intended to embark on a software development project in a way that is efficient and aimed for at the first moment of revenue. So it given the nature of software development, it's really not about trying to predict the cost of the entire future, but to best position your first step so that a next step is possible.
I mean, it sounds very much like a journey, right? I mean, it's not like, you know, if it is a process, if it is a project, it's a journey that you're taking with something. But if I talk to my wife, it's like, hey, let's get some babysitters. Let's go for in the mountains. Let's go for a hike. Oh yeah, sounds fun. Where are we gonna go? Like, hey, I want us to get to the top of Pikes Peak. I'm not exactly sure how we're gonna get there, right? There's a couple different ways. I'm not even sure what the weather's like today, but I know we'll get there. Just got to work with me a little bit. And she look at me like sideways, like, I don't know if this is a good idea. I mean, can you promise I'm going to get there alive? Like, I'm going to do my best. But you can trust me, right? I mean, there's a lot of expectations there that really have got to be managed. And certainly, my wife has come to trust me over the years for a variety of other things, right? Like, help raising her kids. They're all healthy and happy, which was a huge accomplishment for me over the last couple of years.
Right.
Can't say so much the same about myself. We're hanging in there, right? It's a crazy world, but getting the chance to build trust in smaller things. She's like, yeah, maybe I could have kids with this guy. I think he might be able to manage it, right? Maybe we can go for a hike up this mountain. He hasn't, driven me off the side of the road yet.
Baby steps.
Maybe with these iterations on Agile, maybe that even gives a better capability to build trust, to help
Absolutely.
manage but managing those expectations, I imagine, has got to be critical, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's for people that have been through it before, they've seen the cycle and they get it, and it's not challenging. But certainly, people that are new to software development, they often do have a disconnect in what they're expecting, or kind of what they've seen on TV or what they imagined, and that what I described in that article is probably the best way to characterize the most common disconnect, and that is that they see it as one thing that has a size that needs to be predictable, that will be the end of your spending, and they're going to become rich or not, and it's really very different from that.
Reality doesn't really care about your feelings or your desires, right? That's the universe, right? But if you have a good plan, you have a good team, everybody's on the same page about what they're trying to do, and you have the intestinal fortitude to keep working through the process. It sounds to me like that is your best recipe for getting to what you're describing, is this ongoing thing that's profitable. You're making money, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and the trust component is key. That is probably our biggest hurdle with a new customer, is getting them to the point where not only they understand, but they trust, because certainly a bad firm can execute something in an agile manner and deliver something really terrible. So building trust and establishing that that confidence that that their vendor's the right party to work with, that's really going to look out for their interests. That's the key. And to your point about investment and kind of the risks there, software is a risky endeavor, but software also, as everybody has seen, it can be wildly wildly successful in terms of dollars, in terms of revenue dollars. That's exactly the case with Microsoft. That they went through the roof, and ultimately Bill Gates ended up being one of the richest people in the world. And that because of the power of automation and the things that you can accomplish in terms of reproducible, efficient things that can be accomplished by a computer instead of by human staff. Even the simple act of putting an e-commerce platform in place, or e-commerce presence in place, can grow a company's reach and ability to sell in an astronomical way without really forcing them to exert too many more resources. So the potential revenue or profit from a successful software venture, either for a private organization that's using it for their own efficiency, or someone that's actually building something for people to use in the outside world, it's vast.
I figured there's been a thing that people have said for years about how you can't really go wrong investing in real estate and that sort of thing. And I couldn't possibly say anything counter to that. I'm not a real estate expert or anything like that, but I know a lot of companies have sunk money into like commercial real estate. Buy your big building. It'll be an investment long term. You're not wasting money on a lease to somebody else. But I mean, you look at the way things have panned out in 2020 with the craziness of the pandemic and all that, and what it's done to commercial real estate. I certainly can't. I don't have a crystal ball to know where that's going. But I don't really see the internet going anywhere. And it's become even more valuable and powerful in people's lives, right? Especially because of what's going on in 2020. So I imagine investing in your digital presence and taking that leap of faith and developing something that's going to expand your capability to serve your customers or what they can do. I mean, that's seems a lot less risky than buying a big office building.
Yeah, I guess that could be debated. It's probably circumstantial, but I would argue that real estate is probably generally a safer bet. But software, while being more risky, has substantially larger payout potential. That's not always the case, but in general, that'd be my gut feeling.
With all this about successful projects and how they go on forever, I mean, does development ever really stop on these things? I mean, should it?
It should not for anything that is adopted and used. If it's a bad idea, certainly it should end. But if it's a great idea and people are using it, you can't leave those people out in the cold. And you're crazy to just let your market share be taken, grabbed and walked away with by someone else.
Whoa, 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 whoa. That's not the Google model here. I mean, the Google model is see what somebody else is doing, make a version of it that's not quite as cool, not quite as great, and then get adoption and then kill it in 2 years. I mean, that's a pretty great business model, right? I mean, it's not they say for AdWords and Google because the actual search, because they've got that on lockdown. But I mean, I'm looking at like the graveyard of software things that Google's developed over the years. What was the one that I thought was, I remember, was it like almost 5, 6 years ago? Google Wave. I remember thinking, man, that is a great idea. Man, this is like somewhere in between chat and email. Oh, that's awesome. I love it. This is going places. I'm going to learn about this and tell people. Yeah, that didn't make it.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to compete with the Googles of the world, but I think there's an equal chance that if you're successful enough that Google's taking a look at what you're doing, that there's a pretty good likelihood that they buy you out. So I think at the point where you're being looked at by Google as a competitor, you've probably enjoyed some fraction of success already.
Yeah, getting bought out. The common startup strategy, right, is develop something pretty amazing, then get acquired, and hopefully they keep it going. But kind of makes you want to go out and just start building something new today, huh?
You know, it's building software is just it's a surprisingly creative discipline, world, and it's really enjoyable because for that very reason that you can do things that are really very useful and productive that that people can value. Now, they aren't always successful, but it's still really, really fun to be able to do a lot of the stuff that we can do with software, and certainly in the web context.
That's great. Well, I mean, this is a 4-day weekend because of the holidays, so I might just fire up Notepad. Yeah, I'm one of those guys programming in Notepad. But well, this is great. This was a great chat today. I really like this topic.
Absolutely.
We're getting close to our end of time, so everybody that tunes in, thank you. We do this digital strategy chat every week on Fridays. Be sure to check out our website at denverdata.com. So we post snippets from these chats and additional resources on digital strategy. Also check out our YouTube channel for more of these videos, and on Facebook Live. Be sure to like and subscribe. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, David. Have a great day.